Hello, everybody. People are still rolling in. We'll get started in just a second here. All right. Looks like we are just over right on the dot, 9 o'clock, nice and early for you West Coast folks. Almost lunchtime for us over here on the East Coast, but we'll go ahead and get started so you guys can dive back into your day. Welcome to today's webinar. So you can kind of see from the title slide here, today's topic is hard conversations and stronger teams. We're really going to be looking at some leadership skills for veterinary professionals, which is a variety of roles. Could be a practice owner, could be a practice manager, could be a lead technician, but all really great skills that we're going to go through today. Learn some strategies for effective communication and growth and development for your team. So just a little bit of background about our company, iVet360, and what we bring to the field. Our mission here is really to just educate and help hospitals implement innovative and sustainable operational best practices, which might mean fixing problems, answering questions, making plans, building budgets. It's a mouthful, but what it really means for you guys is our job is to do everything possible to help you make your practice as successful as can be. And so today, in the context, that means helping you help your teams be more accountable and helping your leaders navigate the maze of uncomfortable conversations. So we do just kind of the breadth of our service. We have 3 or 4 key areas that we look at. Our analytics and finance team, we offer real-time data analytics and financial services like bookkeeping to help you track and exceed your business goals, making business goals, keeping on track with them. Our HR and team support team, which is myself, and you'll see here Tamisha, who is our moderator for today's webinar, answering the questions in our question box and making sure things are working for you guys. But we assist with recruiting, training, staff retention, really just making sure that your team is well poised to operate smoothly and efficiently. It's a very wide, bucket. Our marketing suite develops and implements effective marketing strategies to really attract new clients, retain your existing clients, and focus on enhancing your hospital's growth and reputation. So bottom line, our goal, educate, help hospitals put those solutions out into practice to really achieve operational excellence and be the best that your team can be, and ultimately really just enable you guys to focus on doing what you do best, which is caring for those patients that are there in front of you. A little bit about me. I am Megan McGrew. Prior to joining iVet360, I was a lifelong boots on the ground veterinary professional. So we'll just say a long time ago. I started as a veterinary assistant and worked my way into management roles shortly thereafter. To date myself, I will say I've had over a decade and a half in leadership across a variety of practices, corporate, private, 1 doctor, 9 doctor, GP, even a busy emergency practice for a brief stint. And so here, since I've joined iVet360, it's my immense pleasure. I get to work with a huge variety of practice owners, practice managers, sometimes even developing practice leads. And we really work on initiatives that drive overall success, develop and implement structure to support your hospital and your teams better, and support leaders through those challenging HR situations that pop up, because we all know there's no escaping that, even in vet med. I generally like to say I've seen it all, but I still get surprised even a couple decades later. And I think as you guys all know about this field, there's always something to learn. So I really like to focus on delivering that high quality medicine and driving that through staff retention, staff training, staff development. I also think it's extremely important to have a fun work atmosphere. So I really love helping practices make the undesirable seem more desirable, and the things that they don't want to do less frustrating and stressful, but really rekindling the love for the field. I think sometimes it's easy to forget we do rewarding work, but sometimes it is work, 4-letter word. In my, I like to say, spare time, I wrangle a house that's just like overflowing with noise and chaos and energy. I have 5 kids, 5 dogs, 8 goats, a cat, and maybe tomorrow, like a baby possum or a raccoon will show up at my gate. Who knows? Whatever it is, it gets to come in and we take care of all of them. Chaos or not. Okay, so perfect. So let's talk a little bit about what brings us here today. Why have this webinar? Why attend this webinar? What are some of the things that we're looking to get out of it? mastering or at least increasing comfortability with these difficult conversations is crucial for leading a good team and being a good leader. We regularly, like daily, multiple times daily, hear that communication is a huge opportunity in veterinary practices we work with. It can be super challenging to focus on this, especially in these like really high pressure, highly emotional, and tense situations that can be almost every difficult conversation you'll have. We find also that a lot of leaders in this industry are your tenured receptionists, technicians that have been with the practice for decades. Oftentimes, they're your greatest employees. They got your back. They're there. They know the ins and outs of the practice, and they've learned their leadership skills on the fly, kind of sink or swim style, with no formal training or development. And as a result, right, through no fault of their own necessarily, soft skills can be a huge gap that's really difficult to overcome without some support and training. And those soft skills impact things like communication and being able to have meaningful, productive, difficult conversations with staff about a variety of issues. So let's talk a little bit about some of the objectives we'll have for this webinar. So as leaders, we really want to understand why these types of conversations are necessary, but also inevitable. If we're not having them, it's not necessarily because we don't need to. The goal is to teach you guys some strategies to help you prepare and navigate those tough conversations and develop skills for managing emotions and conflict constructively. Because emotions and conflict aren't bad, we just need to figure out how to deal with them. Ideally, I hope you guys gain a little bit of confidence in how to use some clear, respectful communication tools to really drive positive, solution-oriented outcomes, which will better your team, better your practice, better your relationships with your team. And while we can't wave a magic wand and just go, poof, it's easier, yay, we can help you prepare, and preparation is key in this situation. So let's talk a little bit about why difficult conversations matter. Firstly, let's look at the impact on team dynamics. When these difficult conversations are avoided, it can lead to unresolved issues that have a negative impact on morale and team cohesion. When we tackle them head on, we see morale improves, maybe not immediately for that individual having a difficult conversation, but overall, right, over time, morale improves, teamwork has the chance to make the dream work. I love that, this ridiculous rhyme, and I figured out a way to work it in today. So there you go, teamwork makes the dream work. We also see improved team trust and performance. So addressing these issues head on, whether they're behavior, conduct, attendance, helps clear the air, fosters a culture of trust and collaboration and mutual respect, not just between the leader and their teams, but between peers. On the flip side, avoidance can negatively impact interpersonal team dynamics and really undermine everything you're doing to try and improve collaboration and teamwork, impacting workflows, operational support, and that last bullet point here, impacting your client experience and patient care. Like, don't have a lot of talking points about that because we kind of know what it looks like. Thinking about employees that have high accountability, high performing, very engaged, have really good teamwork and collaboration, that experience will feel different for your clients. And even though they can't verbalize and tell us, it feels different for your patients too. So we can definitely see both sides of that, sometimes even on the same day, because people are people and emotions are hard sometimes. Most of you here are probably practice leaders, so let's talk a little bit about your role in these conversations. Whether you're practice owner, practice manager, lead tech, lead receptionist, office manager, there's a variety of roles. But also, ultimately, if there's really great peer accountability, you might even be exhibiting some of these or practicing some of these traits in conversations with peers and helping them work on their development. I think the biggest one is just that leadership as facilitators for the conversation. You set the tone, and it's not just in the context of these difficult conversations. How you show up to work on a day-to-day is going to set the tone for how that day feels in the practice. We need to make sure that as leaders, we are creating a safe space for that communication, be that through an open door policy or through practicing some of these key tenets to making difficult conversations feel safer and more comfortable for staff members. We really need to model emotional intelligence. We need to stay calm, composed, practice empathy during these difficult moments and high emotions. We'll talk a little bit more about emotional intelligence later. I've got a good chunk of the slideshows dedicated to that. We also set the standard, right? We set the tone, we set the standard. When leaders manage tough conversations with integrity, It demonstrates to your teams the importance of handling challenges professionally and handling emotions professionally, and handling conflict professionally. Because I think in a team with high emotions and high tense situations, and a lot of people with a variety of different personality types, you cannot escape emotion and you cannot escape conflict. They're natural. We just need to learn how to work through them in a healthy way for our teams. Let's talk a little bit about where we see these tough talks popping up in veterinary medicine. They look a little different than talks that might happen in other industries and other fields. Number one, probably the most common challenges are going to be your performance issues, especially in a low performing team or a team that's had very low accountability. Making that transition to a high performing, high accountability team, there's going to be a lot of performance conversations. They're tackling gaps in performance, employee performance, or behavior or conduct potentially, right? Client complaints. If you don't know what this is, who are you and where do you work? This is just navigating those conversations where you've got upset, dissatisfied, frustrated clients, regardless of the reason. These same skills that you'll learn today will help you in your client conversations. Interpersonal conflict, because people are people. It's natural, it's normal to have conflict, but it can absolutely escalate out of control if not mitigated and properly managed. Like, for example, anyone ever hear that reception versus tech dynamic? Like, happens in a lot of practices. And that's something that we can work through in a healthy way for the teams. Workplace frustrations or disappointments. This is maybe talking with some individuals about their unmet expectations. Maybe they wanted a promotion they didn't get, or maybe there's some personal issues impacting work. I say show of hands, I don't see everybody, but show of hands if you've never found yourself dealing with one of these scenarios, right? Day in, day out. Maybe we didn't deal with it well, but we probably are experiencing those things. And if you haven't, there's a good chance that you're a bot. All right, let's pop into this next slide. So I told you before, we're going to talk a little bit more about emotional intelligence. What is it? Why is it important? How are we going to use it? So we're going to dive in and start talking through some really great tools that will help you manage these conversations with tact. As a leader, or even just as a human being when you consider it, emotional intelligence directly impacts how you understand, motivate, and connect with others. So developing and honing this skill can help you build trust, stronger relationships with your team, enhance communication, because to be honest, I don't think there's a single veterinary team out there that is not actively always working on bettering their communication skills, and can ultimately significantly boost team morale and engagement. There are 5 key components to emotional intelligence that we'll walk through in a little bit more depth. We're going to look at self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And you'll hear the word empathy a lot today. So just so you know, you'll hear that on repeat. That is a big theme under these conversations that we're having. So let's talk first about self-awareness. First of all, what is it, right? Self-awareness is the ability to recognize and understand your own emotions, your thoughts and behaviors, and how they affect others. It involves really being conscious of your emotional state in the moment and knowing what drives your actions and decisions. And kind of that big picture perspective, right? How does what I'm doing impact others? You can teach it. It takes a lot of difficult conversations, but people can learn self-awareness. Why does it matter? It allows leaders to have better self-control over reactions in difficult situations, right? So leaders who are self-aware tend to be more likely to understand their strengths and weaknesses, which can actually make them more effective in communicating and in leading others. Let's talk through an example. We'll walk through, I've got a couple examples. So for each of these categories, really kind of put yourself in both perspectives, the perspective of the employee as well as the perspective of the leader and how that might impact the outcome of a conversation. So example 1, let's say it's a conversation with about an employee's recent performance. Our leader here realizes that they are feeling frustrated and impatient. Maybe they've just been dealing with these gaps in performance for a really long time, right? And they just finally had it. It's the straw that broke the camel's back. They're recognizing that this is an emotional reaction. It could cloud their judgment. So instead of proceeding with the conversation in that negative tone, they take the time, right? Take a brief pause, center yourself, acknowledge those emotions internally, and then return to your conversation with a calm demeanor, right? And that self-awareness is key. If they didn't recognize those emotions, they wouldn't have necessarily been able to take that moment, take a pause, take a deep breath, and move forward. Example 2, a leader is maybe talking through a behavior that's been disruptive in team meetings. And they notice themselves becoming defensive, right? Because what do you do when a staff member becomes defensive? Well, you kind of become defensive back, right? And it just escalates. But they notice that they're becoming defensive in this situation. And before responding, they pause, they reflect on maybe why they're feeling this way, and acknowledge that maybe your employee didn't mean harm. And they didn't, and they want to approach the conversation with more empathy rather than defensiveness. Anyone ever heard of assuming positive intent, right? Sometimes you have to force yourself to see that perspective to have a fruitful and unbiased conversation. And that perspective can be challenging sometimes because people are people, as we've said before. Okay, let's pop into, here we go, self-regulation. So this one, what is it, right? The self-regulation refers to the ability to manage or control one's emotions. Right now, we're not just recognizing them, we're able to manage and work through and control them and keep that composure, especially in stressful or challenging situations, which is like a daily in veterinary medicine. It involves staying calm, being adaptable, and not letting those impulsive behaviors or emotions take control or influence the way those conversations go. It matters because leaders that are good at this self-regulation skill can think clearly, make more thoughtful decisions, and just maintain that composure during tough conversations. They really model that emotional control, which can actually in turn have a calming effect on the team and promote a more constructive conversation, right? That we talked about that, setting the tone and setting the example. Example one, let's say an employee becomes upset and raises their voice during a conversation about, work that they did not complete in a timely manner. Let's say the leader remains calm in this case and doesn't mirror the employee's elevation and tone. Instead, our leader's going to soften their voice, focus on de-escalating the situation, and maybe say something like, you know what, I can see you're upset. Take a moment to breathe and we can discuss how to resolve this together. Or similarly, right, veterinarians may be having a conversation with a technician who's been consistently making mistakes during procedures. Instead of expressing that frustration and impatience, whether verbally or non-verbally, that's the key there, because those nonverbals say a lot, the leader is going to use some controlled language to focus on the behavior, not the person, and remains respectful throughout the conversation. They take that deep breath, they frame their feedback in a way that's constructive and helpful, and really encourages that technician to want to improve versus become defensive, disengaged, and check out. Motivation. Motivation can have a lot of different meanings, but in the context of emotional intelligence, it refers to the drive to achieve goals for the sake of personal satisfaction, not just for external rewards. It involves really having a passion for the work you're doing and being committed to that continuous growth, even in the face of challenges. And like, let's be honest, sometimes it's hard to be motivated day in, day out. Sometimes it's hard to get out of bed and walk into work excited to have those difficult conversations. But it matters because leaders with high motivation tend to be more resilient, more dedicated to their work, and more focused on long-term goals, which means they're going to take the steps to get there. They tend to be more successful at inspiring and motivating others, even when there's adversity or setbacks, which, like I said before, it's a day-to-day in vet med, right? You're going to see some adversity, you're going to see some setbacks. You've got to be adaptable. Oftentimes, their enthusiasm and commitment to a cause can be contagious and help impact others' motivation and engagement. So let's say, for example, we've got a team member who's been struggling with time management and the whole workflow of the clinic is being negatively impacted. The leader in this situation is going to encourage the employee by expressing their belief in their ability to improve. Hey, you know what? I know you care deeply about what you're doing and I've seen how dedicated you are. I think together we can come up with a strategy to help you get back on track. I think alternatively, right, you can see how maybe if the leader were frustrated and, made some short-ended comments that were, hey, get back to work, or hey, you're not working fast enough, how that might close an employee down versus inspire them to be motivated themselves. Or let's see, this is probably something everyone here has experienced. Maybe leaders having a difficult conversation about tardiness, someone who's just always late, day in, day out. Instead of focusing solely on the problem, let's highlight their past positive contributions and motivate them to take more responsibility in their role. This might be saying something like, you know what, you've always been a reliable team player, and I know this is an adjustment period for you. Let's work together to find a solution that works for you and the clinic. Because ultimately, right, we need to set that expectation, but we can still be supportive and empathetic in those situations. Which brings us to empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It goes beyond sympathy, which is kind of just like generally feeling sorry for someone. But empathy involves being able to put yourself in another person's shoes and genuinely comprehend their emotions and perspectives. Doesn't mean you're feeling what they feel. You can validate their feelings. It doesn't mean you're like, oh yeah, I feel that too. Like, let's do this together. But you're able to understand and comprehend versus kind of just, sure, yeah, feelings are feelings. We all have them. Now, why does it matter, right? Empathy is crucial in leadership because it's going to help you foster trust, respect, and build deeper connections with team members. When leaders empathize with others, they tend to communicate more effectively. They're more successful at conflict resolution. And over time, they create a really supportive environment where people feel heard and valued. So let's talk about this past employee we've discussed already who's had repeated mistakes. This leader in this case is going to take some time to understand the underlying cause, right? They might ask something like, you know what, I've noticed some struggles lately and I want to make sure you feel supported. Is there anything going on that's affecting your work? Let's figure out how we can support you in improving things together, right? We're in this together. Maybe an employee is expressing frustration about handling those difficult clients on the phone. It's okay, like let's listen empathetically. You can validate their feelings. You know what? I can understand how those situations can be draining. You're doing your best and sometimes it's not easy. Let's talk about how we can address this so you don't feel overwhelmed. Right? We recognized, we validated that emotion. Maybe as leaders, you've been in those shoes, like literally been in those shoes before, and you can empathize a little bit more clearly and strongly in those cases. Let's talk about social skills. Definition. So social skills, in the context of this emotional intelligence conversation, it involves the ability to build and maintain healthy relationships, communicating effectively, and managing those social interactions and dynamics with ease. This would include things like teamwork, conflict resolution, practicing active listening, your ability to influence and motivate others. And the reason that it matters here is because having these strong social skills in this context enables leaders to navigate and resolve conflicts, motivate their team, and collaborate with colleagues and clients. Leaders with good social skills can inspire cooperation and positive outcomes in group settings, not just difficult conversations. Maybe there's some change that you're working through in the team. Maybe you're having some growing pains as you've added a new doctor and some new staff, really focusing on creating some positive outcomes in those settings. So let's say, for example, we've got a leader who recognizes two of their team members are not getting along, and it's starting to affect performance and workflow. During the one-on-one conversation, this leader is not just going to point out the issues, but take time to mediate the situation and help the employee understand the perspective of their colleague while also addressing their behavior, right? Setting those expectations, but also still validating their feelings. You might say something like, you know what, I know there's been some challenges between you and your coworker. Let's explore how we can improve communication and work together more effectively. Or maybe we're thinking about like a situation where an employee is expressing dissatisfaction with their workload, right? There's not enough staff, there's too much work. How often do we hear that? We are overwhelmed as things are bottlenecking. So in this case, the leader's going to listen carefully and then guide the conversation towards solutions. Because right now, right, the only way out is through. Instead of focusing on the issue alone and emphasizing going, yeah, that really stinks. We are short-staffed. There's a lot of work to do. Get back to it. We're going to work collaboratively with our employees, right? Come up with a plan that addresses their concerns, maintains a positive tone, and works you guys towards a solution. You know what? I can see how this workload can be overwhelming. Let's see how we can balance it, make sure everyone feels supported, and make sure that our clinic and operations run smoothly. That's a really short example, probably for a much longer, bigger problem. But in the moment, you can see how those social skills might impact the overall dynamic of working through a challenge. So EI, which is emotional intelligence, we might refer to it as EI just for the sake of time. Let's see how it impacts these tough conversations. So one of the biggest impacts we'll see is that it helps leaders maintain control, be empathetic, and foster that mutual understanding, even if you don't agree, right? You don't have to agree with your employees to empathize and understand. It also helps yield more positive income. More positive income. That also can happen. Yield more positive outcomes. So let's walk through a super common scenario and see how EI impacts this conversation and process. So scenario, excuse me. Oh, we've got a pro tip here, right? Give yourself the time to get in the right headspace before the conversation occurs, especially if you yourself are involved in some of these highly emotional, intense situations, or you yourself are recognizing through self-awareness that you've got some frustration. So scenario, this poor vet tech that we've been picking on all day, she's been making repeated mistakes during just day-to-day responsibilities, things like mislabeling prescriptions, missing on record documentation, incorrect invoicing, you name it, right? The list is small things, but they're all starting to add up. And now we're getting to some frustration from the team, and maybe also some frustration from the leader because they're having to fix all these mistakes and they're getting all these complaints from everybody. The leader needs to address this issue, but really needs to make sure that the technician doesn't feel attacked. Which can be harder than it sounds. So self-awareness. So in this situation, our leader needs to recognize that they themselves feel stressed and irritated or frustrated due to the mistakes, but take the time, give themselves the space, and make an effort to approach the conversation calmly when all of those emotions have settled. Might not mean today, maybe it means tomorrow, right? Self-regulation. Our leader here needs to remain composed, even if and when the technician becomes defensive, apologetic, maybe starts blaming other people, and really needs to avoid raising their voice or showing frustration, even if that's what's being mirrored to them from their technician. From the motivation perspective, our leader should be focused on helping the technician improve, right? Saying something like, I know you're capable of performing at a higher standard. We just need to figure out a way to prevent these errors moving forward. Really put your faith out there, right? I believe in their ability to improve. Even fake it till you make it, even if you don't see the way forward. Empathy. Our leader's going to ask, hey, is there something that's making it harder for you to focus or feel confident completing these tasks? I want to make sure you're supported. For social skills, our leader is going to use some positive communication, maybe offer up some solutions, and remain collaborative, right? This is a we thing. Well, granted, you got to do the most of the work. It is a we problem. Let's set up a plan for additional training or mentorship where needed, maybe, or together we can make sure this doesn't continue to happen, right? Like I said, that pro tip, give yourself the time to get in the right headspace before the conversation occurs. Doesn't mean it's too late if you're already in it. Sometimes you can take a pause and take a break, and that's okay too. I think sometimes it's challenging to recognize leaders are human, and contrary to popular belief, we do have emotions that we need to consider and keep aligned with our goals for the conversation. I think a lot of people do that. How many times we think of the things we wish we could say? It's a really great exercise, but gets the demons out, but like they don't belong in these meetings. There's no space for them. So give yourself the time and space to get all those demons out before you dive into these conversations. So let's talk through some key things to remember when you're navigating these tough talks with your team. If you can master some of these skills, and these can be applied to a variety of challenges, both personal and professional. I think some will work great on toddlers and some won't. Some will work great on teenagers. Unfortunately, nothing here is probably going to help you reason with your cat. So no luck there, but you'll be a step ahead when you're preparing yourself to meet with a team member if you can get some of these skills under your belt, in your tool belt. So we're going to talk through active listening, maintaining calm, having that respectful communication, and really focusing on a solution-oriented approach. So active listening. What does this mean? Listening without interrupting. Listening that's not just waiting for your turn to talk. We need to truly focus on what we're hearing and the other person's full message before we jump in. It can be really easy to want to finish their sentences, even if you think you know exactly where they're going with it, even if we're really pressed for time and we just want to get the ball rolling, get this conversation moving forward. We need to give them the time and space to say it. So you might use body language, things like nodding, eye contact to show that you're engaged and not just sitting, waiting out your turn to have your piece and preparing your response in the time. I think it's also okay to recognize silence is okay. Allow space for them to pause and continue. Don't fill that silence with more words. Give them time to reflect and take their time to answer your questions or to come up with their solutions. Paraphrasing and reflecting. This skill is, you might hear a lot of things starting with, so what I'm hearing is, right? We're going to repeat back the core of what they have said in our own words to show that we understand and check for accuracy. It not only makes your speakers feel heard, but it's going to prevent assumptions. So we're reflecting the content, but also the emotion too in these situations. So you might say something like, it sounds like that was really frustrating for you, right? Or so what I'm hearing is you feel like X, Y, Z. We're also going to ask clarifying and open-ended questions. So an open-ended question, those are those questions that start with how, what, maybe it's a prompt like tell me about, but the ultimate goal is to invite deeper conversation. Something like, what was most challenging about that situation? Now, clarifying questions will help you reduce misunderstandings. So this is where maybe you're just not comprehend the what your speaker is saying or what their sentiment was in that situation. You might find yourself saying something like, "You say you felt unsupported. Can you tell me more about that?" In these situations, we really want to avoid leading or yes or no questions. Those are going to shut down your dialogue and close off the conversation, right? We want to encourage and invite deeper conversation, not ask those closed-ended questions. So for example, we said an open-ended question was, what was the most challenging about that situation? And a closed-ended question would be, was that situation challenging? Yes, no, right? We're not exploring that emotion deeper or why it might have been challenging. Empathy and validation. I told you guys you were going to hear empathy a lot today, so here it is again. So this is really showing that you understand and accept their feelings, even if you don't agree with the content, right? I can see why that would upset you. Don't validate like, yeah, that is upsetting. I'd be mad too, right? I can see why that would upset you. Using emotionally attuned language, things that sound like that sounds really difficult, or gosh, I can imagine that was stressful. Validation isn't about fixing, it's about honoring their perspective. That perspective is important, right? So I'll repeat that. Validation isn't about fixing, it's about honoring their perspective, letting them have their feelings, validating those feelings, and honor that perspective, but ultimately make sure you're both aligned moving forward. And then we really want to look at collaborative problem solving. After listening fully, like, let's shift into brainstorming together. Next step, what do you think would help this situation, right? Invite their ideas. Would it help if we explored some options together? Maybe they have no ideas, right? That's where you can kind of insert some of your ideas. And it can be a collaborative approach. We really want to reinforce the partnership in this conversation. Let's figure out a solution together. That might be your solution, that's okay, but we really need their buy-in for them to be successful in these situations. Maintaining calm. So this one can be challenging. Composure. Remaining calm during emotionally or very tense conversations is crucial for effective leadership, especially in these high stakes and stressful situations. So we'll talk through, and I know this looks like a lot on the slide. We'll go quickly. We'll talk through just briefly some of these techniques to help you stay calm, even when your conversation escalates or becomes emotional or intense. Number one is deep breathing, right? When you feel your emotions rising, just take a slow, deep breath. What did they tell you? Inhale through your nose, count to 4, hold for a second, exhale through your mouth for a count of 4. Repeat it a few times if you need to. You might say like, hey, let's just take a pause and before you just start breathing really weirdly in front of them. So give yourself the time to do that. But it helps activate your body's relaxation response. So physiologically, right, we're reducing tension and lowering your heart rate. And it also gives you a moment to regain control and regain composure before you respond and go back to your conversation. Really pausing and reflecting, helping you prevent some of those impulsive reactions or just saying the first thing that pops into your mind. You can respond in a more measured and thoughtful way that will ultimately not escalate the situation. If you become emotional or defensive, like, just give yourself that time, recognize those emotions, right? Be self-aware and self-regulate, calm it down, and choose your words carefully to move forward. The last thing you want is for this conversation to go south because of your emotions. Focusing on that listening. Active listening is actually a lot harder than it sounds, right? And just really focusing on their concerns, their perspectives, especially if you have a strong feeling and evidence that says, you know what, I'm right. Like, I have every argument on my side over here. We really still need to focus on listening to what they have to say and focus on those active listening skills, right? Where we're directing some energy away from our own emotions and really focusing on the other person and what they have to say. It will also help you exhibit that empathy a little bit more clearly and give you time to process that information in a calm, still manner. Managing your body language. I think the current saying is fix your face. This is just really maintaining an open and non-threatening posture. So, sit there with your arms crossed, rolling your eyes, reading the sign on the wall, scratching your hair, picking your teeth, whatever the case may be. Keep your tone of voice steady and calm. Keep your attention on your employee. Your body language in this situation can significantly influence the energy of the conversation. So those positive, non-defensive body language techniques can actually just by themselves de-escalate the tension and make this other person feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more heard in this conversation. Also, using positive self-talk. This might be like you're your own hype man, right? Before your conversation, or maybe during, just mentally, not verbally during your conversation. Something like, "Gosh, I can handle this. I got this. I'm calm. I'm focused." Especially if you're feeling triggered, remind yourself that you know how to navigate this situation. You just need a minute to reflect. It helps you reframe it in your mind and boost your confidence, and hopefully helps calm some of that anxiety or frustration you might feel, both before, in the moment, maybe even afterwards as you're reflecting on how the conversation went. We also really want to focus on the outcome, not the emotion, right? Keep our focus on the goal of the conversation, whether it's resolving an issue, clarifying an expectation or a gap in expectations, or working towards a solution. Really focusing on what do I want to achieve rather than letting yourself get caught up in the emotions of that moment. By staying solution focused, you can kind of detach from some of that emotional tension and hopefully steer the conversation towards a constructive resolution. We talked earlier about just taking that pause. Take a break if you need it. If the conversation's getting too heated, it's okay to suggest, hey, let's take a short break. Let's reconvene in 10 minutes. I think we both need a moment to process and collect ourselves. This is a really great tool, especially if your employees like ugly crying and there's like spit and tears. Like, just give them a moment to regain that composure, and come back to the table, hopefully in a clearer, calmer mindset. So this isn't just for you. This can be, you might recognize this and give your employee a break as well. And it's okay to acknowledge your emotions. This is where we can show a little bit of vulnerability and build stronger, deeper connections with our staff members. If you feel that you're getting emotional, like, it can help to acknowledge it openly and calmly. Saying something like, I'm feeling really frustrated right now, but I want to make sure that we work through this together. Like, it's okay to have those feelings. And I think acknowledging those emotions can actually diffuse tension by showing you have that self-awareness and transparency. It also lets the other person know that you're committed to continuing this conversation and this process professionally, even if you are feeling those emotions. You're setting that tone, you're kind of being that example and modeling that composure for your staff. Keep your focus on the facts, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, but really focusing on some objective facts, some specific examples instead of the emotions or opinions. We can recognize and validate the emotions and opinions, but we really want to focus and keep this fact-based. I noticed you've been late to the last 3 shifts, which has affected your team's schedule, right? That might be something that you'd say. Focusing on facts instead of emotions hopefully keeps the conversation from becoming overly personal or confrontational, and really keeps the conversation centered on what can be addressed or changed, or what needs to be addressed and changed. Practicing mindfulness. These are techniques like grounding exercises or focusing on your senses, right? Looking, hopefully not distractingly, but like ways that you can look at, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you feeling in the moment? Really grounding yourself before and or during a tough conversation. It helps you stay present, actually can reduce anxiety and emotional reactivity, and can allow you to stay focused on the conversation rather than just getting swept away by those high emotions that are coming through. I would bet my bottom dollar if you like Google mindfulness exercises, they probably have some really great tips and tricks. We just don't have we don't have those listed for you here. Empathy, empathize with the other person. Here's empathy again. Put yourself in their shoes, understand their perspective. And this might be saying things like we said before, I can see the situation's frustrating. It sounds like a tough issue to deal with, but it will help calm both of you. They're feeling heard, they're feeling understood. It can de-escalate that emotional tension, and it can help your understanding of the situation and really shift the organic path that conversation takes. And then lastly, we're going to look at reframing the conversation, really focusing on the opportunity for growth or the potential for positive outcome. For example, instead of thinking this is a conflict, think maybe this is an opportunity to strengthen and better our communication. It changes the emotional context, reduces stress, and hopefully helps you stay calm and focused on solutions instead of problems. Recognize the problem, but focus on the solution. So by focusing and incorporating some of these techniques into that approach, hopefully you can maintain a sense of calm or control and composure during those difficult conversations, really managing those emotions, but setting that example for your team and modeling that emotional intelligence and setting the tone, ultimately driving a more effective and supportive workplace through your conversations. Respectful communication. This is another one that's a little bit long, but we're really going to focus on maintaining that respect, especially and even when disagreeing is a key component for a successful, difficult conversation. So here's some key tenets and examples for phrases or things that you guys can use to help keep the conversation respectful, even in tense, emotional, stressful situations. So here we are, we're going to look at perspective again, right? There's like some key words in this webinar: perspective, empathy. Some of these things you're just going to hear on repeat. And this might be like, saying something like, I understand where you're coming from. These are going to sound a lot like empathy statements, right? I hear what you're saying and I can understand why you feel that way. We're validating their emotions. We're recognizing their perspective. We're going to steer ourselves towards neutral, non-confrontational language. Like I said, when you're disagreeing, that can be hard. You know what? I see things a bit differently, but let me share my perspective. Or I understand your concerns, but I think we need to consider some other factors here, right? We're validating their opinion, but we're trying to be neutral, non-confrontational, and shifting towards, let me share my perspective now, right? We've given you the time and space. Now it's my turn. You really want to keep the focus on the issue, not the person. This is where we talked about being very objective and very fact-based. Maybe we're not questioning their commitment or their motives, but we need to approach this issue differently. Or maybe the disagreement's more about how we approach the problem than about your ultimate goals or motivating factors. We also want to make sure we stay open to dialogue and resolution, right? We don't want to close off this conversation and have our employees leave feeling disgruntled, frustrated, like they've gotten nowhere, just got a slap on the wrist, right? So this might look like you saying, I'd like to find a solution that works for both of us. So let's keep discussing this. Or can we explore some other possibilities and see if we can find middle ground? Really moving forward together and staying in this together. We talked about being calm. So, right, calmly expressing your thoughts, showing that empathy, even more important when you're having a disagreement, right? That might be saying something like, you know what, I get this is frustrating. I want to make sure we work through it together. And I understand where you're coming from, but I feel this is going to be the best way to approach it. Because let's be honest, your staff members aren't always going to have all of the answers when you ask them these questions. They're not going to have solutions at the ready for the challenges that you've brought them. So that's where you need to partner with them. Recognize that common ground, right? We both want the same outcome here. We're here for the right reasons. We may have different ideas about how to get there, and we may have different ideas about how we've gotten here, but let's move forward together because we both care about the success of our team. We both care about the success of our doctors. We both care about successful outcomes for our patients, whatever the case may be. Ultimately, right, hopefully, there's no denying you both want what's best for the clinic, and you just need to work together and align your approaches so that you can achieve that outcome. And then keeping that conversation forward focused. We're going to talk a little bit more about that solution-oriented approach up next here, but really not focusing on all of those things in the past, right? We've talked about them, we've acknowledged them, we've put ourselves in each other's shoes. Let's come to an agreement and move forward and explore some solutions. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. I put this picture because I feel like sometimes you'll have 50 ideas and there's only going to be one real solution sometimes. So it seemed like a good photo. So we're going to talk about shifting from discussing your problem to identifying possible solutions. This can actually be a key moment in a conversation, especially during difficult conversations, because you're really shifting gears. So first we want to go ahead and acknowledge the problem, which we've already done, right? And then we're going to transition to our solutions. So once you've thoroughly discussed, you've hashed out all the observations, all the feedback, all the details, summarize that, right, what's been shared, and then guide it towards a conversation of solutions. You know what, I think we've clearly identified our issue. Now let's focus on how we can address it. What are some ways we might move forward from here, right? That's those open-ended, solution-oriented questions. What do you think could help resolve the issue? What ideas do you have for moving forward? And this might be part 2 of a conversation, right? Give them some time to digest, to process the things that you've discussed. Maybe you meet again in a couple days and have a more fruitful solution-based conversation once they've had that time. We also talked previously, right, reframing the conversation and reframing that problem as an opportunity. It's still a problem, yes, but we're really going to shift our mindset, right? Focus on the problem as an opportunity or maybe an improvement for growth or development, right? It can shift that mindset to a constructive solution-oriented approach versus just feeling like you're getting blamed for everything or the list of problems is growing. So you might say something like, this situation is challenging, but it's also an opportunity for us to refine our processes and figure out what works best. how can we take what we've learned and apply it to make things better, right? Maybe you're developing an SOP that avoids this confusion in the future. You really want to make sure that as a duo or partnership, you're focusing on some common goals. This might mean you have to remind them of those common goals because it can be hard to remember those when you're emotional and in the moment, but really steering the conversation towards collaboration and constructive problem solving that will achieve that outcome that everybody's looking for, right? Ultimately, we want the clinic to run smoothly and ensure great patient care. How can we work together to achieve that given the challenges we've discussed, right? You might say something like that. We're also going to set really clear positive intentions. So this is establishing that forward-looking tone by setting your intentions to find a solution, which is going to shift the energy of that conversation, hopefully from frustration to action. So you might say something like, let's focus on finding a solution. I'm confident we can come up with something that works on the issue and also focuses on the team's needs. You might find that you have to introduce some possible solutions and ask for feedback. And this is where I say your team members might need some time to process because they don't necessarily have the perspective you do. They don't have the bandwidth. They don't have all of the facts and details about everything going on. They might not be able to come to you with some really great solutions right off the bat. Give them some time to think through it. Then you might offer some potential solutions to really kickstart the conversation and really focusing on presenting your ideas, but also inviting others to give their input or suggest adjustments. I think if they can be part of that process, their buy-in towards working towards that solution is going to be a lot better. And then you really want to focus on using some next steps language, right? So we're going to end the conversation about the problem by introducing those clear next steps, which is hopefully naturally going to help shift that conversation towards your actionable solutions. Looking at collaboration and ownership, this is really, like I said, inviting them to be part of that process, making sure that they are active participants in the problem-solving process. Might be their problem, but they still need to be active participants in how to fix it. Lastly, we're going to summarize the problem and restate the solution and our focused intent. We're going to summarize our problem briefly, transition to that positive solution-oriented direction, and then summarize from there so that everyone is on the same page before you walk away. And that might mean some really specific actionable steps, right? What specific steps are we going to take to improve things moving forward? You might not have your playbook all the way from A to Z, but maybe you can get started with a couple of easy steps like an A to C or an A to B. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about setting yourself up for success. There are some steps that you can take to prepare for this conversation. So we're going to walk through some ways, and granted, I think you have to recognize there are elements that you can never prepare for, and we just have to find peace living with that ambiguity. I've been looking for years, so if you find it, let me know. Shout it out. But there's comfort, right? You just have to be comfortable with that uncomfortable. So some of the things that we're going to look at, assessing the situation, right? What is the core issue and why is it important to address it now? Setting your objectives, right? What is your goal for the conversation? Like I said, are we looking for resolution? Do we want understanding? Are we looking for behavior change or performance adjustment? We also want to make sure we've set ourselves up for success with regards to timing and location. The importance of choosing the right time, like maybe not in the busy of a crazy middle of a crazy busy day, and the place, making sure that we've got a nice private, quiet setting. We also are going to go on a fact-finding mission, right? We want to make sure that we have some concrete examples, that we are not coming at our staff members with generalizations or accusations that are unfounded. And really, we want to help connect the employee with the issue at hand. So we should have some timely examples that are pretty specific, that hopefully don't create extra conflict where possible, maybe where two people are involved. And that might be something that you learn trial and error, unfortunately, over time. So the first one. Let's talk about defining your clear objectives. What do you want to achieve? We need to clarify whether our goals are fixing a behavior, solving a problem, or simply understanding the other person's perspective. We also really want to make sure that we're looking at the outcome, but also the process, right? The process is an important piece of this. Yes, we all have the same goal, we want this outcome, but the process is important because the way that we get there is important. It could mean an engaged staff versus disengaged staff. Well, we got to get here because boss says so, right? That's going to look very different from I am passionate about doing better for my patients and my team. So we're really focusing not just on the outcome, but on creating a constructive dialogue that improves communication throughout this process. So one of the tools that I want to make sure that you guys are aware of as far as like defining some of those objectives is the SBI model. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have not. It's really a model for providing feedback. So the SBI model, it stands for Situation, Behavior, Impact. It's straightforward, it's effective, and it can help provide that clear, actionable feedback. So I'm going to give you this, you can kind of see the picture. It's a little like a worksheet basically that you might fill out even as a practice, right? So we'll walk through a specific example. This poor technician, we'll call this technician Sam that we've been picking on all day. So we're seeing some missed information in medical records on a consistent basis. So this is where our leader, Dr. Smith, who's maybe the leader and owner of the practice, says, "Hey, Sam, thanks for taking the time to chat. I want to talk about something that happened during our shift yesterday. Specifically, it's regarding medical records for our patient, Bella, the 7-year-old beagle who was seen for a routine checkup, right? We're making sure there's very specific information there that they can connect to. For our behavior piece, Dr. Smith says, I noticed that there was some missing information in the medical record, such as the weight and our updated vaccination details. I understand it can get busy, but the record was incomplete when the client was ready to check out." So we saw what behaviors were kind of impacted by the situation. And then the overall impact, right? This is big picture. This led to some confusion at the front desk. Our client had to wait while the staff tried to track down missing information. It delayed Bella's discharge process, and ultimately accurate records are critical for patient care and client service. And in this particular case, it caused some unnecessary stress for the client and the team. And these situations can negatively impact our client's trust and perception of our medical competence. So as a follow-up, right, we're going to shift into that solution-oriented discussion while also practicing empathy. I know things can get hectic, especially in the middle of the day. Can we brainstorm some ways to avoid this in the future? Perhaps we could work on a system to ensure all these fields are checked before a patient leaves. What are your thoughts on that, right? We've given some options for a solution. We've kind of made it clear that our expectation is that these records are complete at the time of checkout. So some key points for some of the things that Dr. Smith did right here. Situation, he clearly identified when and where the issue occurred. The shift, the patient, the incomplete medical record. He even gave us the breed of the patient so that we could remember, because there's probably 20 Bellas on the schedule yesterday. Behavior, he really identified the specific behavior, which was the lack of completing medical records, right? We had missing information in the medical record. And that was outlined without judgment or assumptions. We didn't say, oh, you're always missing on completing your medical records. Or I saw you hanging out in lab just chit-chatting when these records weren't getting done. We took all that judgment out of there. We took all those assumptions out of there, and we just said the facts. The record was incomplete. Now, in recognizing the impact, Dr. Smith explained the impact on clinic operations, the client, and the team. So we really emphasize the consequences in a clear and non-confrontational way. This is where we're connecting those dots for the employee. So by using this model, we gave really clear feedback. Hopefully, we help Sam understand both the specific issue and its broader impacts, that big picture. The conversation stayed constructive and focused on improvement, and hopefully makes it more likely that Sam will take responsibility and work on ensuring better accuracy moving forward. SBI tends to work in general because it does keep the conversation focused on the behavior, the facts, and the impacts, not personal attacks. It can also help connect the employee with why the behavior is relevant or impactful, and help them recognize those things in the future for other scenarios, right? It gives them that perspective, hopefully. So that's a really great tool. So we're going to talk next about creating that safe space. Why timing matters, right? Addressing tough issues in stressful moments, or avoid addressing tough issues in stressful moments. Choose a calm time with minimal traffic, maybe as few possible observers if your employee just needs to make a quiet escape and take some time to process. We really need to focus on creating a comfortable environment. That doesn't mean we need like pillows and couches and like candles and all that fun stuff, but we should have a private, neutral space that's relatively free of distractions. And I hear you, this can absolutely be a challenge in a small hospital with thin walls and 30 barking dogs in kennels, but do your best here, right? Maybe it involves taking them out to coffee or meeting them for lunch somewhere if you have to. Focus on displaying a non-threatening approach. We're going to talk through some nonverbal cues that leaders can use to communicate calm, respect, openness during these difficult conversations, with the ultimate goal of reducing that defensiveness and building up trust, even when the topic is sensitive. And I will tell you, conversation one with an employee, you might do all these things right and they're still extremely shut down. But let's say it's 18 months later and you've been having regular conversations with that same employee. over time, building that relationship and strengthening that trust will make these things more impactful. So don't get discouraged if you still feel like your employees are closed off, if you are practicing all of these non-threatening approaches, right? We talked about body language, not sitting there with your arms crossed or staring at them or staring at the wall or, being awkward, right? Like angle your body so you're not square on with them to reduce that confrontational feel. Sit or stand. Don't stand if they're sitting, right? You guys want to be on an even playing field, and just keep your arms relaxed, right? Keep your arms relaxed and uncrossed. Soft eye contact, we're not going to be super intense, right? We're going to maintain natural eye contact to show we're attentive, but don't stare, right? Don't just like awkwardly stare and unblinking. Look away occasionally so they don't feel scrutinized or, taken aback by your intense eye contact. We also want to focus on calm facial expressions. We talked about fixing your face, right? Keep it neutral, soft, try not to be overly stern or serious. And this might shift and change depending on the severity or nature of the offense, right? It could look different for someone who's tardy 3 times versus someone who was observed mistreating a patient, right? But you can still, not occasionally, make sure they know you're engaged, you're listening, avoid things like eye rolls, heavy sighs, raised eyebrows, which might just be natural parts of your facial expression, but can seem judgmental from their perspective. And then really focusing on gentle gestures. If you talk with your hands a lot, try and tone that down, right? Slow, deliberate hand movements versus like really fast stuff. We want to avoid pointing or like really abrupt motions that could be interpreted or felt like as aggressive gestures. We also want to be mindful of proximity, right? Ideally, probably 3 to 4 feet is typically like your most comfortable spacing between 2 people having a conversation, slightly at an angle, not directly across a desk or table if possible. It helps you build those connections and have a better conversation setting. You also want to even out that tone and tempo. Speak slowly, speak clearly, keep your tone steady. Try to keep a lower volume than usual to keep that emotional temperature down. Right, just like you're wooing an angry chihuahua here, right? You're not going to get all crazy and loud and speak really high volume. We also want to have some supportive silence. Pausing after they speak, don't rush to fill their silence. Nodding, maybe gently murmuring like, yep, I hear you, I understand, I agree, or I recognize what you're saying. Give them that time and space. We don't need to dive right in to fill that silence. They may not be done talking yet, to be honest. And we talked a little bit about mirroring. We're not going to mirror them as they escalate. However, we can gently reflect the other person's posture or tone. That kind of builds a connection. Don't mimic, right? We're not trying to like perfectly mirror them, but we're going to try to match their level of energy or body language where appropriate, where it lines up with some of these things that we're looking at. This one's a doozy, right? Handling strong emotions. First, we need to identify what those emotions are. What are the emotional reactions we're going to see most commonly in these situations? Defensiveness, anger, fear, sadness. We're humans. Things like pride, shame, embarrassment, they all come across in a variety of ways. We usually jump to defense and deflection as a default, but we need to just pause and recognize also some employees are going to cry no matter what you have to say. We've all got them. In this setting, we just need to be able to manage through that. Enough that we, even though we're empaths ourselves, right, knowing what might come our way can help us stay calm in the midst of this storm. So I know we're running really close on time. We're going to go ahead and stay calm and grounded. We've talked about some of the ways that we can do that previously, right? Making sure we're setting that tone, acknowledging emotions without judgment. We're also going to look at that neutral language that we talked about previously, especially if we need to redirect from their emotions, right? Let's take a step back and focus on the situation at hand. It helps steer the conversation away from those escalating emotions. We talked about taking that break if we need it, right? Take a recess, reconvene in 10, give yourselves the time and space to come back to that calm space where you can have a productive conversation. We also have already discussed avoiding reactive responses. If emotions are running high and a reactive response can escalate the conversation. So pause, take a moment before you respond, keep that dialogue moving forward. Here's that empathy again, right? We're focusing on empathy and understanding. We've also discussed reframing those negative emotions into some more constructive language. I hear your concerns, but I think there's an opportunity here for us to improve things. Like, let's find a way to move forward. That empathy also involves validating feelings and experiences, making sure we also are staying focused on our facts and not our emotions, right? Making sure we're looking at that SBI model. What are the objective things that we can link this to? We talked about leaders leading by example, setting that emotional tone and being that emotional regulator. Using positive reinforcement where appropriate. This doesn't show its head very often in difficult conversations, but it can be really helpful, right? Maybe there's nothing positive to say. You can pull something out of your bag, right? Like, I really appreciate your honesty and willingness to share how you feel, or thank you for coming to this meeting and being open to having this conversation. The last step there is going to just be offering that support and follow-up, making sure that we address things properly, right? We've had a chance to work through it. Like, what are the next steps as far as follow-up go? Making sure that there's commitment both from the employee and the manager, and it shows that you as their leader are committed to their well-being and the solution at hand. It's not improve this behavior at all costs. We want to make sure that we recognize that process for the employee. Now, I did put together a case study, but I think we're going to have to just skip right on through it, and we can potentially revisit that later because I'm over on time. I went through this several times, but yes, here we are still running over on time. Pitfalls to avoid. This is one of the things I do want to make sure we highlight before we wrap it up. Avoiding the conversation. This is a big one and hard to work through, right? The dangers of procrastination. We're all guilty, right? No one walks into work amped for that difficult conversation, like ready to be confrontational and have conflict. We dread it just as much as anyone else, maybe even more. But conflict avoidance can result in continued performance or conduct issues, and it's going to make it really challenging to navigate without proactive coaching and performance management. Being vague or not having your facts, right? Lack of clear feedback can just increase confusion and frustration. So do your due diligence, make sure you have the facts, and maintain an open mind to seek to understand versus casting judgment without all the details. Escalating the conflict. We talked a lot about ways that you guys can de-escalate and calm things down and reset the tone. Reacting with anger or defensiveness is not the right way to go about this. We need to take the time, get in the right headspace, before or during the conversation, potentially, depending on how it goes. And a big pitfall, ignoring or failing on the follow-up. If we are not making sure that these solutions are carried through, we're not going to see the impact and benefits of our hard work. We're not focusing on the process. We're just looking at the outcome. But we can also impact the outcome negatively by lack of follow-through. You might see backsliding, nonchalance about accountability, but it also takes away your chance to recognize positive change. We really need to make sure we recognize that positive change, build it in, make sure that follow-up is built into your conversation wrap-up, and set some timeframes to hold both you and your staff member accountable. Some of these things that we're going to talk through, stick with me if you guys have some time. We can probably wrap this up in about 10 minutes. Really setting yourself up for long-term success. Some of the things that you guys can do just in general, right, to make sure that these difficult conversations become easier over time, and really focusing on preparing yourself when and where you can to make that unavoidable and uncomfortable a little bit easier day in, day out. So this is really going to involve creating that environment where those difficult conversations are less difficult, but it requires proactive effort from your leaders to build trust, promote open communication, establish that culture of psychological safety. Here are some things you guys can do to lay the groundwork. I won't dive into too much detail about each of them because, like I said, time. Time comes for all of us eventually. But foster that open and transparent communication. That could be an open door policy, encouraging open communication with like really good feedback loops, both positive and negative, just making that part of the everyday conversation. So you might have some regular one-on-ones, like I said, that open door policy, or just clear expectations, clear communication about expectations to make sure that your staff feels comfortable raising concerns, frustrations, they're coming to you. Building trust and psychological safety. This is really just making a space where employees feel like mistakes are okay and I can still be respected even though I've made one. Be consistent in how you treat all of your team members and avoid that playing favorites or acting unpredictably or with variability depending on the circumstance. So really leading by example, like we talked about before, being open and self-aware of your own mistakes, practicing active listening, building those good feedback loops so that we can really focus on growth and not necessarily blame in some of these situations. And trust is the cornerstone of this, right? So building good relationships with your staff through these conversations over time will just continue to reinforce this. Practice that active listening. Come back to that. We went through that pretty extensively prior. Setting clear expectations and boundaries, right? Making sure your team knows what's expected in terms of performance, behavior, communication, making sure there's clear processes for how and when feedback is given and how it's addressed, and sticking to them. This might mean holding your other leaders in your hospital accountable to those same expectations. Be transparent about goals for the team, right? Set some specific goals, actionable goals, achievable goals, but provide regular feedback so that we know, are we getting there? Are we seeing progress and making improvement? And that's that feedback again, right? Normalizing feedback and development. Make it a regular part of your culture. Incorporate it into everyday interactions. And everyone goes, oh, feedback, but feedback is positive too, right? Making sure that we're recognizing when our teams are excelling and when they're high performing. You also want to maintain emotional intelligence. We talked about that EI quotient. There are tons of trainings and books. We talked about some of the key tenets of it today. Those are things that you can practice to maintain that and mirror that. Recognize that in your own staff. Teach it to your own staff. The more emotionally intelligent your team is, the more successful you will be. And the more emotionally intelligent you are as a leader, the more successful your team will be and these conversations will be. We talked about maintaining that problem solving and collaborative nature in your conversations, making sure you're focused on solutions, not just the problems. Address issues early and directly. Don't wait till it becomes a crisis. Don't wait until you have a laundry list of 50 things to have a conversation with somebody. If you notice small issues, try to address them immediately with a private, constructive conversation. This will help you prevent more serious issues arising later. Being consistent and fair, right? We mentioned that earlier, making sure that there's consistency in how you're approaching feedback and what actions are taken when you're recognizing gaps in expectations, performance, behavior, conduct, all of that fun jazz. And then make sure you're available. Provide support and resources for improvement. Show them that you're invested in their success. Make sure they have what they need or know that they can come and talk to you if they have needs. When they feel supported and equipped with the tools they need, they're a lot more likely to view those difficult conversations as constructive rather than punitive, right? It's your problem, fix it. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that they've got what they need and that we're their partners moving toward that. We talked a lot about all these tenets already, so we'll just kind of bounce over to this summary slide. So key points and takeaways that I want you guys to make sure you highlight. Preparation's key. Be prepared. Prepare for what you can prepare for and find comfort and peace with the things you cannot prepare for. Making sure that you're using that clear, respectful communication and you have the most favorable time and location. Staying calm and empathetic, even in the face of high emotion, right? Practicing that self-awareness, that self-regulation, and committing to that follow-through to ensure lasting solutions and that the process is respected. And ultimately, I think you just got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable because they're never going to be super comfortable. Sorry, we took a little bit longer than was planned. I think in my run-throughs, this went pretty smooth. I do want to highlight for you guys before we wrap up today, our next webinar is called Unlocking Doctor Compliance, what it is, why it matters, and how to track it. One of our numbers fanatics, spreadsheet wizards, and our analytics teams is going to be delivering that to you guys September 24th at 10 a.m. PST, 1 p.m. EST. So a little bit later for all you late birds out there. If you've got questions, feel free to pop them in the chat bar with your email so that we can tackle those after the fact. I don't think we're going to have time for them here and now, but definitely this next webinar will be about doctor compliance, what it really means, why it matters, how to measure it, and how to turn some of those insights into meaningful coaching opportunities for your teams and your doctors. So you'll learn some practical strategies, how to use data to support your doctors, how to elevate patient care and grow your practice with purpose, because I think in this field data matters and we all love a good diagnostic profile. So this webinar specifically will be included on demand in our resource library. So you will see a follow-up email with some pertinent information to get you there, and it will live there for those of you that weren't able to stick around for the rest of the meeting today. I will go ahead, like I said, if you've got questions, we'll leave it open for a little bit here so you can pop those in the chat bar, and we will definitely reach out to you if you leave your email, and we can answer your questions. Thank you guys for attending, and we hope to see you at our next webinar in September.